Green Bay hustle, grind it up. Hit the field, we don't bluff. Touchdown dances, feel the love. Jordan's got that MVP stuff. It's time for Ohio. Let's go. Packers bringing that show. It's time for you know who wanna go, gonna glow.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Ohana Packers Edition podcast, the podcast where two dudes talk Green Bay Packers football. I am Iowa Joe, again, without Mike Kawano. He's off dealing with kids again, but the doctor is in. We do have Dr. Andrew Mertig with us from Pack-A-Day and all his other great ventures. Andrew, we kind of talked about this a little bit beforehand. This is like the first official time we've actually met. We've done the group chats with Brian Maffey and all that, and we've also had some talks on the social media machines, but we've never actually been able to sit down together. Last year, we tried to get you on, but we just couldn't get linked up with it. So we finally got you in. How's things going for you?
I'm here. Doctor is so formal. But no, it's really great. Yeah, I mean it's one of those relationships where like you feel like you know somebody because you've interacted so many times, and you're like, I don't think we've met. So this is really cool. Super honored anytime anybody wants to have me on and listen to my innate ramblings about the NFL draft.
Yeah, this is the time. Well, and this year's been really rough with Mike because, like I said, between his kids and all that, they've been getting him sick and everything. We haven't had much going on with it, but usually this is the time of year Mike and I really thrive because we're both really into it. So we try to get as many guests on as we can because this is what we love to talk about. So this week we are wrapping up really our draft countdown. We're getting into the positions where it's not really a need. It's more of it's more of a, oh, what's the word for it, a luxury at this point if the Packers take one. It would be I could understand where they could get it, but I could also completely understand if they bypass it. We are on the safety group this week. No real news when it comes to like free agency or anything when it comes to the safeties, but they'd made their big splash here with the Xavier McKinney move and then drafting the three safeties last year in Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, and Keaton Oladapo. So really, w- Andrew, what are you thinking about this year's safety group? Is there room for improvement, or do you think we're pretty much set with what we have going on?
Yeah, I think you could look at it either way. On one hand, you have Xavier McKinney, and you're just going to rely on him being a superstar. And on the other hand, you have an ascending player in Evan Williams that you think can take that next leap. And so I think the optimist in me is saying this position group is totally taken care of. You're going to get some internal development, whether that be from Williams continuing to grow as a starter in the NFL, maybe Javon Bullard having a little bit of a bounce back. I thought his rookie year was kind of rough. And so,
Yeah.
like to see some growth there. And, whether that's in a more dedicated slot role, whether it's in a very versatile safety corner hybrid kind of thing. I'm not sure, but I think there's at least room to be optimistic. We know what we thought of him coming out of the draft, and at least the Packers had really high hopes for what he could be right away. And then Oladapo, who we didn't really see a lot of on the field and defense, and potentially continuing to progress. Maybe he's a little bit of that like linebacker hybrid, but I think like that's kind of good enough. You have your four, maybe you have your five. I know we were talking a little bit about Zane Anderson, and he looks like he'll probably be back. So maybe they have their five, and they're just going to say we're good to go with that. Omar Brown is another safety that's on the roster. Truthfully, I don't know a ton about him. I remember studying him out of Nebraska, but I'd have to look back at my notes to see what I thought. So that's not a great sign. But I think you could go in and you would say, okay, they're probably going to bring in like 2 or 3 UDFAs. They're not going to waste a draft pick on the safety position, and they'll just be fine. On the other hand, maybe a safety you really love falls into your lap, and you say, well, we could improve there, and maybe you could get more of a true deep safety to give you a little bit of insurance if anything happens to McKinney, or again, if Evan Williams misses some time for the second year in a row.
And I I'm just kind of looking at his profile on the Packers roster. Omar Brown seems like he's a little bit older for a rookie. According to this, he's at 24. So there's possibility there's something out of him, but I to me, I see him more as maybe the special teams practice squad type guy. Anybody who's listened to our show for the past year would knows what Mike and I both feel about the Zane Anderson thing, where he was a competent special teamer. He did make a couple plays when he was forced to go in there, but we preferred to see Anthony Johnson Jr. in there more than that. But that's not what the Packers felt. So maybe Omar Brown could be that guy that supplants Zane Anderson in what they're looking for. And really, Zane Anderson's an exclusive rights free agent, and that's probably the only reason the Packers will be bringing him back at this point. Is it's really not going to cost them anything to keep him on the team. I do agree with you that it it's not much of a need for safety. Like I said a few minutes ago, it's more of the luxury, but we also do know the Packers like to look ahead on things. And who knows? Maybe they grab another guy in the late rounds and say, all right, we're going to stash this guy. We're going to use him sparingly, but we're going to really push him to be that guy that's going to be next to McKinney, or maybe take over for
Right.
McKinney in a couple years or whatever. And I know there's a lot of speculation with what's going to happen with Bullard because, you know, the guy that we know well, Brian Maffey, keeps saying that he's nothing but a slot guy, and that's probably where they're going to play him. But then the Packers just went out and spent a bunch of money on Nate Hobbs. That you know they profile him more as a slot corner, but they have said that he's most likely going to play boundary. I just wrote an article this last week on the whole Jair thing, so go check that out on the website. But I don't see them getting rid of Jair anytime soon this year. I mean, if they're going to move on with him, I do see it next year. But so you have two year guys on the outside. You've got to figure out what you're going to do with Keyshawn. Is he going to be a boundary guy? Is he going to be a slot guy? Then you've got Bullard to throw in there. You've got Oladapo. Is he going to be a slot guy? Is he going to be, is he going to be a deep guy? Is he going to be a linebacker type like you just said? And if memory serves, they did have to start playing Oladapo there towards the end of the season, and he really wasn't playing bad from what I remember. I mean, there was nothing really that flashed out on him, but sometimes it's like the offensive line when your name's not being called, it's kind of a good thing, but when you're hearing your name more often than not, it's not really a good thing.
Right.
But this group is young. McKinney is going to be 26 this year. Am I right on
Yes,
that?
I believe
Yeah,
that is
gonna
correct. He's 25 right now.
yeah. So he's still young. This whole core group is young. Bullard 22, Oladapo's 24, Evan Williams is 23. So there's going to be growth. There's going to be some growing pains to go with it. The big question is do you upset the apple cart by bringing in another draft pick? Not saying that they're not going to be welcoming to him, but then you've got Oladapo and those guys thinking, okay, the ones lower in the depth chart thinking, okay, well, am I safe? Am I, is my job on the line here, or what's happening? So, and competition is a good thing, but you don't ever want to really ruin a relationship in the group, because then it kind of taints the group, so to say. But so this is probably going to be a super quick episode, just because, like we keep saying, it's not a huge need. It's not, and really, this Andrew and I were kind of talking about this before recording. A lot of the guys that would be ones to watch for went back to school. I mean, there's some guys there that are, would be excellent picks in years that the Packers needed a safety, but it's not the year to be a team who needs a safety. So, Andrew, with that said, if I can talk here, is there anybody in the free agent realm that you would even consider bringing into the team right now?
Yeah, I mean, unless there was a Zane Anderson type that they wanted to bring in, your fifth safety, really, you're going to be relying on them to play special teams. And if they have to see the field on defensive snaps, you're probably in trouble anyways. So there's not necessarily anybody that I see out there. I mean, I'm just scrolling through some free agency lists, and like if you're looking for a starting safety, like yeah, a player like Justin Simmons is out there. Packers aren't going to touch that because obviously they want Evan Williams to win that second safety role,
Right.
and they feel good about their depth. Justin Simmons is not going to come someplace that he's not going to be a full time player. So, no, I mean I don't think that there is a lot that's very tempting out there in the free agency world right now.
No, and a lot of them you got to look at age wise. There's not really a lot of young guys out in the free agent world right now that are at a decent age. A lot of them are getting closer towards the end of their careers more than, being in their peak. Like a couple years ago, Tyron Matthew would have been amazing to pick up. But now he's 33. He did resign with the Saints, but just using him as an example, 33, how much more does he really have left in him? You hope for at least a year or two. Uh what's the other? Harrison Smith would have been a solid veteran pickup, 4 or 5 years ago, but now he's 36. I think he finally did say that this will be his last year in the league. I could be wrong on that, but I was pretty sure that he kind of confirmed that this was going to be his last year. But yeah, unless you're looking for somebody specifically to replace Zane Anderson or Catan Oladapo or whatever, then yeah, I really don't think anybody in the free agency world is worth it. But had they not splashed big last year with McKinney, then I could see it with like a Justin Reed or a Simmons or a Matthew or somebody like that. But obviously that didn't happen. I guess we can just jump right into the draft stuff. Mike usually breaks this down by days, who would you take on day one? Who would you?
Yeah.
But as I always use as my disclaimer, I always struggle putting round grades on players. So let's just say, who is your favorite safety out of this group of draft picks this year or
Yeah, so
draft prospects?
one of the things, one of the reasons why I was kind of excited to talk about safeties this year is last year I felt like I learned some difficult lessons. There were some players that I really liked a lot. Tyler Newbin on was my like number one safety on film grade, and then he got a like sub 4 RAS score. And I have a formula where I take a player's film grade and then I calculate it by there's a factor that kind of punishes you for being an older prospect, and then takes a look at your testing. And Newman slid from what probably would have been like a borderline first, second round grade all the way, deep into the third. And then he has a great rookie season. And then I see something very similar with Cameron Kinchins, who had a really nice rookie year for the Rams. And that really kind of taught me a lesson that when you're taking a look at safeties, you need to like grade instincts above athleticism. And there's a certain threshold of athleticism that safeties have to have. But especially when you start to talk about players that are going to go into schemes where they're going to be asked to do different things, like you don't want somebody who has a really slow 40 time playing single high, but they can still be a really good NFL safety if they're in the right scheme. And so I think that's the tricky thing about looking at the safety position, but also the thing that I think is really fun. And when I look at the top of the draft, there's really two players. And so there's Malachi Starks from Georgia, who was getting all of the buzz and heat all fall and was supposed to be the big time guy. Some people were even talking about him as a top 10 prospect, and a lot of that has cooled a bit. And I still think he's safely a first round player, but he's more of your like do everything. He's not an insane athlete. He's not particularly long. I believe his RAS score is going to be relatively poor because his agility testing was not good. But instincts. This is a guy who has been on the back end of that Georgia defense for a while. He's experienced. He's a fantastic player. I think he does everything really, really well. He might not have a great trait, but I don't think that this is a position where you have to have a great trait. Like, I think he can come down and play the run. I think he can be a really fantastic player with instincts in a too high look or cover four. I don't know that you necessarily want him in single high, although he has straight line speed. So maybe you could do a little bit of that. But I think when you're looking at the teams who are going to look for a really versatile safety, a do everything, Malachi Starks is the guy. I think he's a little bit more plug and play than some of the other players. And then there's the other guy who's sort of his polar opposite, and that's Nick Imanware out of South Carolina. And like this is guy, he has a perfect 10 relative athletic score. This is a size speed freak. He looks really good on the field, but like there's some defensive coordinator around the NFL that is going to pound the table for this guy. That's going to be like, this is my perfect fit. If there is like a minus version of Kyle Hamilton, maybe a B plus version, like this is the guy. He's huge. He's super fast. He flashes on tape. I don't know that he has like the super safe floor that a player like Malachi Starks is going to have, but his ceiling is higher. And so who goes first? I don't know. I think it's going to just depend on what team has like that defensive coordinator that's like, you need to go get me this guy. I'm going to teach him how to be the next great thing in the NFL. But yeah, Starks and Imanware get me pretty excited at the top of this draft.
Yeah, Imanware, I watched because I always tell people that when I watch guys to do our show and that, I tend to stay away from the top of the round guys or the top guys because it's like everybody in the world talks about him. You know, everybody who has a podcast and a microphone will talk about him. So I want to talk about guys that aren't probably going to get talked about. But I was like, okay, we're going to be talking safety. Let's just go ahead and take a look at it, Imanware, and see what it is. And you know, you're right. He's got all the athletic traits to him, perfect 10 on it, and I do agree that you can't always go off just athletic traits. They and I tell people I honestly only look at athletic at like the combine and stuff like that when I have a question after watching the film on somebody. So if watch a guy and he's struggling to chase somebody down or he's struggling to cross over, okay, let's go see what he ran. Is he showing that type of speed when he runs in a straight line and his time, or if he does like that? And really, when you look at that with this kid, most of it, tracks. The only thing that I said that it looked like in his back pedal he was a little stiff,
Yeah.
and that was about the only knock I had on him when watching him. Otherwise, he seemed to do everything you wanted to ask for. He is going to be super. I want to say he's going to be super raw. So whether or not somebody's going, like you said, going to want to take a chance and taking him first and saying, all right, we can teach him, and that's going to be another story. But I do, in my notebook I have he's probably going to be the first safety off the board, just because people are going to look at the size. He's what, 6'3", 222 or something like that. So this is basically a little bit lighter weight linebacker you've got playing in the safety position. So there people are going to see that and say you can't teach size. Would they have him at the combine? It was 6'3", 220, and that's that's amazing for a safety. And this would be a guy that you would hope you could pack like maybe 20 more pounds on him and just throw him in the middle of the linebacking core and say, here, have at it. But yeah, his testing scores were off the charts. The only thing he didn't do, and it makes you wonder, and this is why I said put in my notes that his back pedal is a little stiff. He didn't do the shuttle or the three cone, and it makes you wonder if the people around him are like, "Don't do it."
Yeah, I think you see this with a lot of the long corners too. Like he's just a little high hipped, and
Yeah,
that's natural. So I think you have to be selective. How are you going to use him? And that's why like a player like Kyle Hamilton was so special to me because he had a lot of hip fluidity for a guy his size. And
yeah.
Imawari is just he's a stiffer player.
So, all right, we got that one out of the way. I knew we were going to have to bring up those two guys at some point. So let's take a deep dive. Give me somebody that you know nobody's talking about, but you think could really be a home run hit for a team if they were to pick him up.
So are we talking like a day 3 player or I
It,
mean
whatever. It just
whatever?
yeah,
Yeah, I think there's a pretty safe middle class this year, which is interesting because last year there just weren't right like safeties that were even being considered in the first round, or
right.
really even like the top half of the second. So I think this year there's probably two players that go like round one, early round two. Then I think you have kind of this middle class, and then of the players that maybe aren't getting the buzz, and this is hard for me to say because I try really hard not to be a Wisconsin homer all the time, but I think Hunter Wohler is one of those players, and I think there's something special when there's a guy who flashes on tape for a Power Five school. And so anytime I see those players that have been around for seemingly, 4 or 5 years and they just keep making splash plays, I say, okay, I think there's probably a role for this guy in the NFL. And is he just a special teamer? Maybe if the athleticism isn't as good, maybe if it's adequate for college, but maybe not in the pros, maybe you would think that. However, Wohler tested his relative athletic score is 9.25, and I didn't look in depth to see everything he tested, but I know he tested pretty well. He's just over 22 years old, so I think there's some appealing stuff there. His instincts are off the charts. He's a super solid tackler. I like the angles he takes. I think he could be one of those players that goes on day 3, and you're looking, 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road, and you say, wow, that turned into a really quality starting safety in the NFL. And the player I always go back to, and I hate to do this because there's a lot of reasons why people would make this comparison, and they're very lazy. But I will say somebody who really stood out in college as a player and his athleticism was wildly underrated was Jim Leonard at Wisconsin. And Wohler has that kind of like he's just always in the right place at the right time. His athleticism doesn't necessarily say this is a great player, but then you see him run off the field and you're like, wow, this is an elite level athlete. So that's somebody that I would be clamoring for if my team had a need at safety. And somehow, if you fell into like middle deep day 3, I would absolutely love his fit on the Packers, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think he probably sneaks into, third,
Well,
fourth.
he's got one thing going against him that the Packers won't, do, and that's take a
Right.
Wisconsin guy.
For sure. We
But,
we all we all wanted to talk about Jared Abbrederis, and that one didn't pan out. So
oh, don't get me started on that asshole. I have a seething dislike for him. We had a bad interaction together, and yeah. But I didn't watch Waller because I knew we were gonna have you on, and we always try to let people who have, like, homer tendencies on their schools speak out. So, Mike would be Michigan. I'm the Iowa fan, so I would be talking, Iowa guys. So I was going to let you talk on him. So I really didn't watch a lot of him. I'm looking at his scorecard for his RAS score. He doesn't really have any reds on him. The only thing that is hurting him is he's orange and all his speed stuff, which it's
mm.
still good, but it's, not like amazing. So according to this, he ran an official 4.57 for the 40. Eh, speed's
Okay.
not great, but it's there. 2.66 for his 20 and a 1.6 for his 10, and then he ran a 4.25 shuttle. But he had a great three cone at a 6.72. So he's not horrible in it. It just you know this is why I never use the combine as a judge on anything, because not everybody can go into those things and test great, because they're specifically created to just be done without pads and not in game fashion and stuff like that. So if he can take that and play better than it on the field, then they're great. But being a Hawkeye, I can't put my stamp of approval on a Badgers. So
Well, if I can pick a second player, somebody I really liked that I think could maybe be in the Packers striking range if they were going to consider drafting a safety at all is Craig Woodson out of Cal. I thought he was really impressive on tape as well. And then he also backed that up with a pretty good testing session. I will say, working against him is he's 24 years old. So not a typical Packers pick, but there's a theory, and I'm stealing this directly from Kyle Fellows, but there's this sort of theory we have developed that the Packers they love, obviously they love athletes, they love youth at the front of the draft. At the end of the draft, they love grabbing bargains, players who have perceived to have slid for some reason. Think Caleb King, for instance. Now, in the middle rounds, there's this theory that they're letting their regional scouts bang the table for players because we keep seeing these like weird picks. Tyrone
yeah,
Hopper, perfect example. Like, where did that come from? And every year there are a handful of picks in the middle rounds that are like that. And so I wonder, maybe if they're, I don't remember. Cal's in the ACC now, maybe. I don't know.
yeah, something
Whatever,
like that. I don't know.
whatever used to be the Pac-10, Pac-12. Whoever their West Coast scout is, I mean, I could see them really falling in love with a guy like Craig Woodson. It's built in. You could just give them Charles' old jersey number, and people
Can't do that.
could
Nate Hobbs
recycle them.
has it.
Oh, well, okay. Well, this
Yeah,
is
Nate
me
Hobbs
not
got the
paying attention to
21.
jersey numbers.
But you can't go wrong with having a Woodson on the team. That worked out for us in the past. So uh you know uh that makes sense, because you do get a lot of those picks that just seem like, well, what are we doing here? And it just wouldn't make sense that they're and who was it that said it? I can't remember who said it, but when the Packers signed Rich Bisaccia to be their special teams coordinator, they said that what they would do in the if they wanted to really rebuild the special teams, what they did in their front offices was, during the draft, we would set aside a certain pick for that coach. And we say, okay,
That's
who
interesting.
is it you want with that pick? And and they said if they really want to change this in Green Bay, they would do the same thing with Bisaccia. Say, all right, Rich, who do you want with this pick? And some of the guys that they've selected, you wonder if that was a Bisaccia type thing. Like maybe Oladapo was Rich saying, "Yeah, I really like that guy. I think he's going to help you on your end, but I think he's really going to help. He could be that special teamer." And we also saw Bisaccia bring in a few guys free agent wise that, when he first came in, like Levitt and Nixon, of course. So it would make sense that they would say, all right, who wants what in these couple of rounds? Is there really a guy that pops off on the tape that he fell this far and you can't believe he fell this far? You know, Tell us. So that would 100% make sense. There was a guy that I kind of watched that could be one of those late rounders that Maxon Hook out of Toledo. And he seemed like one of those late rounders that he always seemed to be around the ball. And I wrote it down as good ball awareness. So when I say good ball awareness, that means he always seems to be able to track where the ball's going, even before the play like really develops. And he was a really good tackler. His speed was okay. I did say his change of direction was a little stiff, so the hips were a little stiff when he was trying to flip. But coming from a small school, Packers, tend to like to take a small school guy and
Yeah.
see what they could get out of him. He's probably going to have to make his bones as a special teamer and work his butt off in practice and training camp and stuff like that to get a spot. But I think he'd be a guy that would be able to work really well in a system like this. So yeah, that would be a guy that I could see that could be like one of those that the regional scout spent a little time in Toledo and said, yeah, that guy might be a solid pickup for
For
us.
sure. Yeah, I like those
So
small school guys.
yeah, and the thing that sucks about the small schools is they don't get the notoriety. They still have amazing players there. They don't get the notoriety because they're not an Alabama or they're not a Florida or they're not something like this. So Alabama's busy filling their coffers with five-star recruits. Some guys fall through the crack. So I haven't been able to ask this because Mike usually runs the show for it, but I the last couple times when it's been just me running things, I always ask this one: what is one guy that you would not take for anything?
In
If
this
the
year's
pack
class,
in this year's class, for the safety group, if the Packers were to call and say, "Hey, we're thinking about this one and this one," and you have this strong, please do not take this guy. Please do not take this guy. Who is that for you in this draft class? Or
yeah,
for this
it's
safety?
interesting. I in the safety group, I don't know that there's a specific player that I would be like, do not take them. There's a couple that I've watched that I would be really shocked if the Packers were considering them. Like Tysheem Johnson from Oregon. I don't know what is going on in Oregon. They're the anti-Penn State. Everybody tests terribly at the combine from
Oh,
Oregon.
don't give me
Um,
that. Iowa did the same thing.
so like they don't teach their players how to run without pads on or something. He struggled. I didn't love his tape either. Like a Dante Trader Jr. out of Maryland. I didn't love what I saw there. He didn't test well. He's a little bit older. Like those kind of players, like just stay away from them. If I guess this is what I would say. If you're thinking about drafting a safety and their ceiling is a special teams guy, you can already do that with Zane Anderson. Don't bother.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that would be my argument. I would advocate for the Packers to draft a safety if they feel like they can play safety. And I do think that is actually problematic. I think the Packers have started to. You talked about Zane Anderson quite a bit. Like the Packers have started to acquire players that fill special teams roles and maybe don't do everything else. And to your point of like some teams may allow their special teams coordinator to draft at a position. A lot of teams allow their special teams coordinator to make a final roster decision. And so they say, obviously, you have kicker and punter, but you get one other roster position. So who's your specialist that you're going to keep? And well, long snapper, of course. So maybe that's 4 players.
Yeah.
But like somebody that's going to be your special teams ace, and a lot of teams have a lot of success with that. It seems like the Packers almost have 3 of those dedicated players. Like there's somebody at linebacker, somebody at safety, maybe another position, and it's like that's too much. You're going to eat into those roster spots as the year goes on, and through attrition, somebody like Zane Anderson is going to have to play defense.
Yep.
And if Zane Anderson is a better special teams player than he is a defender, and he's suddenly having to play true safety, I don't think that that's necessarily a good decision for your roster. You should have somebody that can play safety and then teach them to play special teams. And so if that is the idea, I don't think that's a good way to go. Or you could draft a player from one of the college schools that makes their starting defensive players play special teams so they come in with that experience. You don't necessarily need to like draft somebody just to play special teams.
Where were you when Mike and I were having this discussion last year?
Gone, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, because we had that same argument for the Zane Anderson, Anthony Johnson Jr. deal when it came
Yeah.
to the final cuts. Was Do you want a guy that can just purely play special teams, but is going to struggle to play, you know, live action games? Or do you want a guy that can give you solid play on the field on defense and maybe not so well on special teams? Because in my mind, and I know I'm not anything special, I'm not a coach, I'm not a scout, I'm not anything like that. But in my mind, it's a little bit easier to teach somebody to play special teams than it is to teach somebody to play safety or linebacker or something like that.
And specifically at safety and linebacker, those skills should be transferable. So you're teaching
Yes.
a guy to stay in his lane, or you're teaching the technique of how to take on blocks. And especially given the kickoff rules the way they are now, you want players that can play defense, and
Yep.
it's less a specialty role. So now you're just talking about punt coverage and potentially maybe being on some like block teams or return teams or something. And it's like that's why Rich Bisaccia is getting paid the big bucks to
Yeah.
teach
Yeah.
these players how to do those things. And if you have better transferable skills, the skills should transfer better.
I 100% agree. And like I said, this is the whole discussion Mike and I had all of last year after the final cuts because we were completely, and the same kind of was being said between us with the Eric Wilson over Christian Welch type deal. Was that it seemed like Christian was going to be able to give you everything that you wanted, including the play on defense, whereas Eric Wilson, while could play on the defense, was limited in what he could do on the defense. So, and it's understandable, they're going to do what they want to do, but after seeing what's been going on with special teams and the depth of certain positions, it makes you wonder if they're going to have to have a philosophy change or maybe even possibly coaching change. And that's nothing against Rich Bisaccia. He's a solid guy. He's got a good work ethic and all that. And I'm sure he makes his guys work hard, but there's something there that is an issue. But that's a whole discussion for a whole nother episode. We are here talking about the safety group for the 2025 NFL draft. I keep forgetting what year draft this is. So, what other guys have you watched that you think are some pretty solid guys that even if it's not a Packer draft pick could be something special in the league, maybe even year one?
Yeah, I like I said, I think there's a little bit of a middle class of this safety group, and I think any one of these players could potentially be impactful right away. There's Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State, Billy Bowman Jr. out of Oklahoma,
A lot of
Xavier
juniors,
Watt.
I know.
Yeah, you're right. I was just looking down the list, like junior. There's Xavier Watts out in Notre Dame. I think he is a pretty fun player on tape as well. So I think those are the guys that might sneak into day two, maybe not, but like I think those all could legitimately turn into starters year one if they're drafted to the right scheme. There's some players I like maybe a little bit later in the draft. A lot of Big Ten safeties. Another Penn State guy, Jalen Reed, which would be
I
fun because
love
then
that guy.
Jalen Reed, Jaden Reed, like I don't know what they're gonna have to do on their jerseys, but that would be confusing. I liked Lathan Ransom from Ohio State way more than I thought I would. I think he's cool. And then, of course, there's the Iowa player, Sebastian Castro. He's a little older, but
Yeah,
good, really good player on tape.
on tape he is, and like I said earlier when you were talking about the Oregon guys really crashing when it came to the combine, all the Iowa guys seemed to really tank when it came to the combine, and Sebastian was one of them. And I think he fell into the same trap a lot of Iowa guys fall into. They have a really, really good junior year to the point where people are telling him, you need to come out of college. You need to go into the pros. You need to do this. Oh no, I want to go back. I want to go back. And then he kind of fell off. And now
Yeah.
we're seeing the possibility that, he, I don't think you can compare him to Nubbin from last year, but maybe that type of fall from, okay, well, maybe last year he would have been a third or fourth round pick. Now we're maybe going to be a fifth or sixth round pick just because he did play well on tape but it doesn't look like that athletic profile is out there. The other thing that I really hate about what Iowa does with their pro days is they don't allow the media in there. So we have no idea what these guys do except for what the players tell the media that they did in there. So we have no idea how well they clean things up when it comes to that stuff. So, because some guys just can't test well at the combine because they're not in their element. So put them in the place where they've been for the last 3-4 years, and see what they can do. And a lot of times guys will do better at the pro day than they did at the combine. Jay Higgins, Yaya Black, well, no, Quinn went back. Sorry, I messed that up. Castro. There's a couple of offensive linemen. They all really sucked at the combine, but the thing that we've been hearing is that they kind of stepped it up. They did a little bit better at their pro days and stuff like that. So Castro, I love the kid. I did, like I said, I do think that they fall into that trap because Micah had it happen to him. Uh, uh, Jackson kind of had it happen to him. Oh, what was the other defensive back? Uh, God, it wasn't Cooper because Cooper actually went out on top and hit where he was supposed to hit. But that kid's super athletic anyway. But the Iowa guys just always seem to fall into that. And it makes me worried about next year's class because you're going to have Schulte and Wampa both come out at the safety group. And Wampa was a 5-star recruit going in his freshman year. So you would hope that he has the athletic traits,
Right.
but who knows when the combine comes rolling around. But that's next year. So yeah, Sebastian Castro is going to be a solid player. I just think he's going to have to do a Micah Hyde type. And I'm not using that as a comparison because they are two completely different players, but he's going to have to do a Micah Hyde type build where he's going to have to make his bones on special teams and get put in there and work his way into a position to earn a spot on the defense. And to what you said, Iowa does make a lot of these guys play special teams for the school, so they already know what they're doing there. It's just trying to get them honed into their position. So while I always tell people the Homer and me would love an all Iowa draft, it's not going to be possible. But he does have the ability. He is a bit of a ball hawk on the team. He is doing the right thing by testing out as a safety because I don't think he would have been able to play corner in the league. Maybe slot, but definitely not a boundary guy. So he'd be great. You mentioned Jalen Reed. I love that kid. He's super athletic per his RAS score and all that. Had good ball awareness. He played all over the place. He played in the slot. He played deep. He played as needed. I said he had a good football IQ because he always seemed to be able to put his people into the right positions to make the play. So, before the snap, you'd see him like waving a guy over and, or slapping the defensive lineman on the ass and saying, all right, you got to move over or whatever. And it always tended up to work out for them. So, I thought that was really good. He's a willing tackler, but I thought he needed to work on his form a little bit better, which is kind of typical for a defensive back. They're not always the most sure tacklers in the world, but at least they like to try. Oh, what's my last one? Oh, it tested really well, but you know, it, again, if the Packers hadn't like super dipped into the safety room last year, he would be a guy that I'd say this is a guy that we need on the team. He's going to be your playmaker. One guy I want to bring up because you did bring up Starks from Georgia. It seems like Georgia has 3 guys coming out this year, and I watched one of them and I was not overly impressed, even though he's got a really high, a solid RAS score, and that's Dan Jackson. He's not a tackler in my eye. He was more of a hitter. So what I mean by that is he was more apt to throw his shoulder into it than actually like do a wrap up tackle. So it's like he's trying to be a thumper but doesn't have the strength to be a thumper. his back pedal was a little rough. He played mainly deep. It looked like he had long speed, but it didn't look like he had so much in the quickness. And if you
Yeah.
go look at his RAS score, his testing when it came to the three cone and the shuttle was really poor. So that's where I can say, okay, his testing here was poor. It doesn't show up on tape that he's any better with it. So yeah, you're going to be limited with this guy when it comes to certain areas. So he really is one that if the Packers were to take him, it was like, okay, then they must be seeing something completely different than I see. So they've got a plan for him, but really I was not keen on this kid.
Yeah, that's the kind of player. Like if they brought him in as a UDFA, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I only know about him from watching the other Georgia defenders, so I didn't actually do an official grade. And so I don't know. I don't want to speak too much to that, but I do think, and I mentioned Latham Ransom. One of the things that I am very cognizant of is when a player is like the seventh or eighth or ninth best player on their defense. like how much can you really tell from that? Because you're just like, especially a safety at Georgia. Well, Starks is going to occupy like 65% of the field.
Yeah.
So so what are you doing? And like, do you
Right.
shine in that like little role you have? And if you don't, like, what's going on there? And I don't think like there was ever a time where I really felt like he stuck out. And so, yeah, I mean, that's one of those players like, hey, maybe he just needs the opportunity, and
It could be.
you sign him as a UDFA and he comes in and he shows in rookie camp that he's got a little something, and then you give him the opportunity in the preseason. But that is not the kind of player that I would advocate spending a draft pick on.
So I better do this before Kawano would call me and say that I didn't represent for him or anything. I didn't watch him because I expected Kawano to be on the show and actually be able to talk his homerism for him. So I'm hoping you watched anything on him. But what about the Michigan guys that are coming out for the safety department?
Okay, I didn't watch. I don't have any grades on the Michigan guys. Yeah, I also have a co-host who's a big Michigan fan, and so I typically rely on him to do those things. But yeah, they didn't make the cut, and I think I told this to you pre-show. Like, because we started earlier than I have ever started in
Yeah.
my life in grading, I had to develop my lists really early, and as a result, there's some players that I feel like I missed along the way, and I just had to come to grips with that this year. In previous years, I would like add them late and say, okay, well, this is a player who's probably going to get drafted. Like, let's try to get to 250 this year. There was no way that was happening. So, unfortunately, the Michigan guys didn't make my initial cut.
Well, there you go, Mike. I tried, but we just couldn't come up with it. So,
Now, Will
uh,
Johnson, we could spend an hour talking about Will Johnson if we wanted to talk about Michigan defensive backs, but the safeties, no, I don't know anything.
one of them is Quentin Johnson. I did watch a little bit on him. I don't think he's, you know, there's no RAS score on him because he wasn't a combine guy. So and I don't know. I watched a little bit, but I don't know much about him. And then you've got Makari Page and Wesley Walker both coming out, and both their RAS scores were pretty. Walker's was extremely poor, and Makari's was about mid-ranged. He had a 6.73. So, yeah, not much to say on there. And from my end of things, like I said, I was fully prepared to let Mike talk on for however long he needed to talk on to about him. But hey, shit happens, so no issues there. But so I got a final question for you because we'll wrap up here pretty quick. I figured this was going to be a short episode, and we've actually been talking longer than I expected we were. So I always try to ask this of people. It's Thursday, the night of the draft. Packers are on the board at number 23. Let's say one of the regional scouts, they've got a bunch of names on the board and they're not sure who to pick. One of the scouts goes, "Hey, I know a guy. He's never done me wrong." Your phone rings, says, "Doc, I need a player. Who we taking?" And this could be out of anything, just any player, any position.
At 23.
At 23,
Okay,
first round pick.
You're scaring me here a little bit. I don't know. That's a weird thing about this year. I haven't been like real deep into the mock draft simulators, but the couple of times that I've looked, like pick 23 comes up, and I'm like, I don't really know what to do here. I don't like the options. I think this class is so like the first round is very top heavy. So
Yeah.
I feel like there's probably like 11-ish players that are probably going to end up having first round grades for me. And that's very small compared to most years. But then I think where this class really excels is like player 12 through player like 45 are all going to be really similarly graded. And I don't love the value of 23. Kyle and I have been going through like every team in the first round, and from like episode 11 until like we're already in the mid 20s now, and it's like there's no trade down options here. Like who's trading up into this range? And I feel like for the Packers, they'll get a good player for sure. I just don't think
Right.
that there's anybody I'm clamoring for. Like you have to take this player at 23. I will say this because I'm totally like copping out to your question. Like if it was Shamar Stewart, I don't think he's going to be there. I think Shamar Stewart's a top 10 player. But since he came on a visit and there's some rumors that he's around, I would literally run from Brian Gutekunst's office all the way to the draft stage through the crowd to get that card up there. Like Shamar Stewart is amazing, in my opinion. I have had this sneaking suspicion that the Packers were going to take somebody like Michael Williams, the edge rusher out of Georgia. Now it sounds there's a lot of rumors that he's going to be gone before the Packers pick, but like he's such a Packers player, and I don't like not my favorite guy, but like he just checks all the boxes of what they would do. I guess if I was gonna like pound the table for somebody a little off the beaten path, Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky, the cornerback, I think he is really a special guy. There's a lot of like AJ Terrell to his game, in my opinion. He's a little undersized and he's a little bit of a striker, like not a tackler, and that's
Right.
concerning, especially having gone through Jair. like
Yep.
Jair, a lot of his injury problems are because he doesn't know how to wrap up. Like he's just
Yep.
trying to hit people all the time. But like, oh, he's just so smooth. He's so athletic. I think he's going to be a really good player if he can stay healthy. I know Kyle was saying that he added a little bit of weight, and so he's like in the 190s now, and so like if he can hold that on his frame and still have close to the same athleticism, that's a dude that I think you take him at 23 and people are like, really, you drafted this guy here, and then in 3 years you're like, oh yeah, we got a great value. And that's that AJ Terrell thing to me, because like I loved him. He got drafted and everybody was like, how can you take AJ Terrell in the first round? And then like now we look back and we're like, oh, that's a pretty good pick.
Also, kind of like the Jair thing, where everybody he was drafted and nobody saw
Oh
that
yeah.
coming at all, and so you're pretty set that they're going to reach for not reach, but go for a defensive guy in the first round.
That's my opinion. I mean, until they pick a wide receiver in the first round, that's not Javon Walker. I will continue to not think that that is going to happen. But like people love to say what the Packers would do as if they're in the room.
Right.
And like my response is I just don't know. There's a lot of variables. If Justin Jefferson was available when the Packers picked, when they traded up for Jordan Love, if Justin Jefferson was available, do we think they would have taken Justin Jefferson? Like knowing what we know now that they really liked him, maybe. Like I could make that argument. I don't know for sure, but like I think we often say the Packers won't do this until they do it. So they won't take a linebacker in the first round until they took Quay. They won't take an old guy in the first round until they took Devontae Wyatt. And like that doesn't mean that they want to do those things, but I think they're willing to make some exceptions. And like Brian Gutekunst, the sample size in the grand scheme of things isn't that big, and so I don't always hold like the Ted Thompsonisms
Yeah,
against Brian Gutekunst, because I think there's some things he likes to do a little different. Are there Packer thresholds? For sure.
definitely.
Absolutely. Do they make exceptions from time to time? I also think that is the case. Um, so could they take a wide receiver in the first round? Yeah. I just don't know who they like. Like
Right, right.
Tetero McMillan, like, does he make sense on this team? Maybe.
Yeah,
Uh,
but there's one thing that just came out recently that he said in an interview, and I know it probably was taken out of context, and it's just like, I don't know if I want this kid now. And he said that he doesn't watch tape on himself, and he doesn't watch like highlights, but then he also doesn't watch tape on himself. So it's like,
Interesting.
you don't watch what you're if the coach says, here, we need you to watch this, you're not watching it. I didn't watch the interview. I just saw the little snippet that they wrote up. So I mean, it could be completely taken out of context, but that just gave me like huge Jamarcus Russell and Kyler Murray type things where I don't watch tape. Why do I need to watch tape for? It's like, no, I don't want that. But I've been a big proponent saying that, hey, it's been 23 years since they've taken a wide receiver in the first round. It's been 25 years since they've taken a tight end in the first round. It would be so much the Packer way to have the draft in Green Bay. They're going to do something special for the guys going up to the stage. I've heard rumors. I thought I started the rumor, but then somebody told me that they heard it from somewhere else too. Because we had Dan Kotnick on early in our draft thing, and we were talking about the possibility of what they were going to have the players do to get up to the stage. And I said, there's two things I would love to, one or the other, I would love to see: slide down the Aaron's Hill on a inner tube, or slide or ride the bicycle up to the stage. And ever since then, I've heard tons of rumors about them actually doing the bicycle tradition to the stage when their name is called in the first round. And the thing that adds a little bit more to that is now on the draft cap is a little
Right.
bicycle. So this has been my thought process through the whole thing. The draft is in Green Bay. This may be the only time the draft is in Green Bay. We don't know. It all depends on what's going to happen. So it's been 23 years since they've went for a wide receiver in the first round. It would be the super Green Bay way of doing something outside the norm in their home city, and this would be the year that they could take somebody. I've never really felt like that before. I've had the moments where, oh yeah, they could probably they need a wide receiver, they could take one here. But this is the only time that I've really felt that this is the Green Bay way of them doing something like that.
Yeah.
And so I've been pounding the table for it. And there are some guys there that could, Harris out of Ole Miss, depending on what they feel on him. I know a lot of people are pushing like Burden and Golden, but they're more slot guys. And we've already got the Jalen or Jaden Reed. Do you need another slot guy in there? But I think there's going to be some guys there that could make it interesting for them.
Well, if they wait until the second round, if they take Alec Iomanor in the second, I will be purchasing his jersey on Friday night, express shipping. Get it to me. That's my guy.
Or just give me a call. I'll be up there. So I'll be right there at this stadium. You just give me a call and we'll get it made up for you.
There you go. Customize that. I can't wait.
But Andrew, it's been fun to have you on. I'd like, we'll have to get you on sometime during the season so
Sounds
we can
great.
get your insights on that too. And we'll get you on here when Mike's actually here so Mike can actually be a part of the conversation. But why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and what you're up to right now and all that good stuff?
Yeah, for social media, I'm only on Blue Sky anymore because I'm not fun. But you can find me on the Pack a Day podcast. We're on the Friday episode. We're also doing a mini series of On the Clock. So that is going through every single team, picks 1 through 32, and what their draft needs are. So you can find that on the Pack a Day audio. or you can find it on the Draft Fellows YouTube channel. And then we're also doing some Draft Fellows content too. And on the Pack a Day podcast on Sunday, we had an entire first round mock draft that Kyle and I went back and forth on. So tons of draft content, but check it out if you want to.
That's where you can find him. You can find. I'm strict. I still have my Elon account, but I don't use it. Mainly, I just have it for the group chats that we're a part of, because right now they really haven't done the group chat thing for Blue Sky. But I'm at Blue Sky Iowa _Joe. I think it's either that or it's Iowa Joe, just no space. You can reach out to me on the Elon machine if you want, Iowa _Joe 86. The show at Ohana _Packers. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, all that good stuff. Ohana Packers Edition. Please be sure to like and follow and subscribe and do all that good stuff for us. Let us get our numbers up there. Let us get out there. Let more people hear what we've got going on. We've got a lot of great guests. We want to get a lot more like Andrew and Sarah and Dusty and all those guys on all those on here. So, the more you like, the more you get our numbers up, the more people that listen to it, the more that we have, or more chance we can get more guests on. Please go over and check out the website, ohanapackers.org. Find all our articles. Carlos is doing some great stuff over there. I just put up one this past week. Got to get Mike going on his stuff. But we got a lot of great stuff over there. Find past episodes. And then, of course, our merch store. I know you guys aren't going to see this right now because we don't do the video side of things, but I'm actually wearing one of our shirts right now. Go over, get you one of those stickers, mugs, everything else. Helps us all out. Helps us get, needed things for the show. Like Mike always says, go Pack Go and aloha.
Green Bay hustle, grind it up. Hit the field, we don't bluff. Touchdown dances, feel the love. Jordan's got that MVP stuff. It's time for the up. Let's go. Packers bringing that show. It's time for you know who.